Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. And today it's my privilege to introduce the second half of my recent interview with the amazing, the immortal, the creator of Elric of Melniboné, the creator of Jerry Cornelius, Michael Moorcock, where he is talking about his new graphic novel collection as part of the Michael Moorcock Library from Titan Comics. And it's a collection of tales of the Eternal Champion, Elric himself. This was an interview that I enjoyed so much, and Michael Moorcock never disappoints, that we had enough for 2 episodes of Forbidden Planet. So welcome to the second half of that conversation. And the Eternal Champion collection, which we're talking about in this interview, you can pre-order from the links right here. Without further ado, here is the mighty Michael Moorcock. I was asking you about how you felt when you first saw the artwork and you first saw the 2 books, and what that felt like.
Well, I mean, in a way, I'd tell you the truth. That Jim's was a straight version of the book, condensed into many action-packed pages.
Yeah.
And Phillippe's was not. It was an imaginative take on the book, if you like. I mean, his platform was just hearing about it and then doing his version. What I did was then incorporate some of what he'd done into my text so that I could explain it in terms of the Elric story. So it was one of those sort of back and forth things that got done. He drew a bit on what he'd heard of my writing. I would then, in the English version, do the English for it, and so on. We didn't use Demuth's actual words, and in fact we fell out with Demuth, who'd written the original, a little bit later. He wasn't a particularly pleasant man, and but I remember seeing him some years later in strange circumstances. I think it was in Switzerland, in a hotel, and he had a big Briard dog, a beautiful dog with him, a big black Briard. They're lovely. They're kind of classic dogs, beautiful faces and the whole thing. And then he comes padding along the hotel corridor, and Linda leans down to pat the dog. It's a lovely dog. And says, "Oh, what's its name?" And Michelle won't say. And eventually she said, "Come on, what's the dog's name?" And he said, "Well, it's Moorcock." I thought he'd probably got the dog so he could kick the poor bugger, whenever he felt pissed off with me. But a few years later, I mean, this is a cruel thing, and I didn't mean it, of course, but anyway, it's a cruel thing. He was in poor circumstances financially. So I sent him a message. I said, "I'm very sorry to hear you broke, Michelle. How much do you want for your dog?" And he didn't reply for some reason. I don't know why.
That's fantastic.
Anyway,
that's so. I love it.
These things are not all created in happy
Of course not, but that's what I've always found fascinating about talking to you, mate, is you're always very honest about that dynamic, which it's far more interesting to hear about the reality of those relationships and the often PR-led versions of these conversations many people churn out these days.
I agree, and I've never been any good at that kind of promotional promotional sobriety. I mean, it's quite interesting living in the States to see how different the English people are in England, where they're much more relaxed and just talking straightforwardly to people, and in America, where they, even if they know the people and they're very relaxed in the chat shows and all the rest of it, they're still far more formal, they're far more constricted than they are in England. But then that's Americans. They're a more constricted people. I mean, that's why they produce such good comics. I mean, it all comes out of the puritanical.
What? I think you're absolutely right. It's because it's whenever you see Hollywood stars and they're on, say, Graham Norton, they're clearly just been drinking and they're letting their hair down and they're just messing around. Where you're absolutely right. But there's also that dynamic here with a lot of chat shows in the States where well, the chat show hosts themselves tend to be very, very funny, witty people. Not all of them, but most of them. And it's almost like they're the ones doing the gags, and the guests have to be relatively straight.
Well,
it's kind of an inversion of the way we do it over here, right?
That's true. Well, you are looking, you're watching the show because of the personality running it. There's no question of that. I'm not interested in the interviews much.
Yeah.
There's a guy here called Seth Meyer who I like.
Oh yeah, he's great. I like him too.
He's political, and he runs he does a late night show which has got a lot of politics in it. That I like. Most of them, and Colbert I like.
Colbert's good too.
And I actually like them, but I mean they're comedians. I'm not really interested in most of the people they interview. No. They're usually a film star you've never heard of,
I think it's true. Most nights they are fundamentally more interesting than the guests.
Absolutely.
And there's very few guests who are as interesting as the monologues are, right?
Absolutely.
So that's a form that we don't really have here in the UK.
No,
Chat shows are basically about the guest here.
Yes, I think it comes from radio, and well, most stuff comes from radio in the States. It just took a natural transition into from radio to television. So the formats are still similar.
Hey, Mike, I'd just like to close out by flipping back to Elric again.
Yeah.
And what do you think the lasting appeal of Elric is? Elric as a character brings in more fans year after year. And when it seems to me that when people discover Elric, they really stay with him. They want to dive into the whole back catalogue.
Yeah.
And that is why you not only have your whole catalogue of books is out there, but we at Titan have this, huge collection of graphic novels of yours. The appetite for the character just abides, and we love publishing them, and we're all big fans. But I meet so many Elric fans. What do you think it is?
I have no idea, really. I mean, you'd think, given the number of times it's been imitated by people these days, every time you turn up a DC or a Marvel comic, you're seeing some rip-off. I mean, it's in fact getting a little bit. They're going a little bit too far, I think. But anyway, so I've had theories, but they've never really fitted. They haven't fitted the time length. Originally, I thought, right, I'm writing these stories are effectively for older teenagers or whatever, young adults, I suppose they call them nowadays. But they didn't call people making a transition, say, through university from teenage life to adult life. That used to be about the cutoff point for most science fiction and fantasy market. People would grow up and stop reading it. What I always worked on the basis of was that what happens to the people who grow up and stop reading it? I mean, they must still. So I remember me and a guy called Terry Carr in the States, we both were aiming quite firmly at a market. It was, kind of an adolescent angst, because there's quite a bit of angst in Elric, and it was certainly in me when I was writing them. And that kind of, but that stopped. People went on reading Elric. But also, what I did, I think this might happen. As I matured, I tried to make the writing mature. You've got a character. You can't take that character out of itself to make it, a different character. But you can add maturity to your observations about the character. So within the story, you can make it a more mature story. Maybe that's why so much of my stuff has survived, more than most of my contemporaries. And I'm not, I'm always very, very careful about this, because you can go down tomorrow, you can wind up in a Manchester ditch with people refusing to give you your social security, like PJ Proby, with their trousers all ripped. It's terrible. Terrible.
It happens.
Yes, it does happen. Anyway, I won't tell you the PJ Proby.
I'm familiar with the PJ Proby story, and as a former NME man myself, and it was it's certainly very depressing. Yeah.
Well, in a way it was, but Mike and Dave at Savoy, who commissioned the Elric, they commissioned him to do a whole lot of stuff. They had to tape him lying down because he couldn't stand up. He was too drunk to stand up. So they took pictures of him in the studio. He's lying in the corner and he's singing this great voice, which he did
Yeah.
have.
So
I mean,
he was an amazing talent. Yeah.
himself.
He did. Yeah. He wrecked himself.
Wonderful, wonderful job of the artist as an idiot.
Yeah. No, so true. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, back to Elric and his inspiration. The thing is, those comics don't just come out and I look at them and I think, oh, that's a nice version of what I've done, because I'm not really thinking of what I've done, very rarely anyway. And if they're terrible, I think that's a terrible comic of what I've done. But luckily, we haven't done too many of those. I tend to get inspired by them, even after seeing them for some time. I'm looking at the new one, or the stats of the new one, because I haven't actually seen it published yet as we speak. It's really quite. I think it's because the artists are so original. And because they were so original, it took them a while to get recognized, because there's definitely a public for them, no question of that. But I know I used to have terrible trouble getting Jim published by Fleetway. Here he was my best mate, certainly my best mate, who was an artist, and here's Fleetway, and I'm there, and they just would not let me use him, except for a few like single illustrations. They'd never let me use his artwork, and I think it's people have a set idea of what things should be. I know we did at Fleetway. I mean, there was a distinct sense of that at Fleetway. I don't know. You were there, weren't you?
I was. That's exactly right. Yeah, I was at IPC. I was at Fleetway in the later years, and looked after all that stuff. I looked after that library while I was there. So yeah, I know exactly. I mean, I was a magazine publisher for a long time, and I know exactly what you're talking about in terms of, people have the set creators or the set photographers.
That's right.
That they like to work with, and bringing people from outside of that can be very difficult.
Sometimes they're dead. I mean, the guy who edited Everybody's magazine, I don't know if you remember that, Ted Holmes, really nice guy. He started the little thriller series in Cowboy Picture Library. All those little picture libraries.
Lovely stuff.
Great bloke. He used to like Matania, a guy called. Do you know an illustrator called Frank Matania?
Yes.
Well, he used to do incredibly detailed historical scenes of Roman life or Roman the arena, all that sort of thing. Just incredible. He was a beautiful illustrator, but totally out of his time. I mean, he really was late 19th, early 20th century illustrator, but he went on into that time. Ted loved him, so everybody started looking like a magazine from the 1900s. I mean, it was a great magazine, but there were only about 5 people wanting to read it. Because Ted was throwing in all his favorite artists, and his favorite subjects as well, which were mostly horses and firearms, but still, there you went.
So thanks for that, Mike. You have been watching FPTV new releases, and we are talking about the upcoming Michael Moorcock Library Eternal Champion Collection, with just these 2 amazing pieces of work from Cawthorn and from Druillet, and written by Mike, of course. And when you see these books, you're absolutely going to love them. The artwork in these books is really incredible stuff that has stood the test of time. Absolutely. And it's lovely stuff, isn't it, mate?
I think it's better now than it ever was. I mean, people are understanding it better and appreciating it better than they ever did. Yeah, absolutely. I'm really pleased with the whole set, actually. I mean, I have to say that it's a wonderful thing to have.
Do you know what? I'm so glad that you're pleased, because we're very proud of the graphic library, the graphic novel collection. The whole library looks great, and this is kind of the cherry on the cake, really.
Yeah.
So it's James Cawthorn's adaptation of Stormbringer, and it's Phillippe Druillet's Return
Impressions
to
of Elric, I think would be a good way to call it. I mean, they're kind of fantastic impressions of Elric.
Yes,
And I incorporated some of them back into the book. So Druillet was responsible for that too.
And that
was Cawthorn.
That's such a beautiful circle. You're going to love this book when it comes out. It's available for pre-order, and you can see both Druillet and Cawthorn's incredible work on the cover of the book. I think Druillet's got the front cover and Cawthorn's on the back cover. And that's the Eternal Champion collection, available for pre-order here. And this has been the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Michael Moorcock, joining us at FPTV.
See you next time, friends.
Yeah, see you next time, mate. It's always great to see you, Mike. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Take care,
Look after
pal.
yourself.
Yeah,
Stay
same
safe.
to you.
Yeah. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.